Quiet. The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking, by Susan Cain. Introduction. It's December 1, 1955. An early evening in Montgomery, Alabama. A public bus pulls to a stop, and a woman in her 40s, dressed sensibly, gets on. She carries herself with a quiet dignity, even though she spent the entire day bent over an ironing board in the basement of a department store. Her feet are swollen, and her shoulders ache. She finds a seat in the first row of the section marked colored and watches as the bus fills up. Then, the driver looks at her. He orders her to give up her seat for a white passenger who has just boarded. The woman says a single word. A word so quiet, yet so powerful, that it would ignite one of the most important civil rights protests of the 20th century. That word was no. The driver threatens to have her arrested. "You may do that," she replies. Her name, as you know, was Rosa Parks. When we think of Rosa Parks, we often imagine a bold, commanding figure, someone who could easily stand up to a bus full of angry stares. But the reality was very different. The obituaries that flooded the news when she passed away in 2005 described her as soft-spoken, sweet, and small in stature. They called her timid and shy, but said she had the courage of a lion. They spoke of her radical humility and quiet fortitude. This presents a beautiful paradox, doesn't it? How can someone be both shy and courageous, timid, yet world-changing? This is the central question explored in Susan Cain's masterpiece, Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. This book didn't just sell millions of copies, it started a global conversation. It gave a voice to the 1/3 to 1/2 of the population who prefer listening to speaking, and deep conversation to small talk. For years, Susan Cain, a self-described introvert who once worked as a Wall Street lawyer, felt the immense pressure of what she calls the extrovert ideal, the belief that the ideal person is gregarious, alpha, and comfortable in the spotlight. She wondered why our schools, our workplaces, and our culture are so biased against the quiet and contemplative. So she spent the next 7 years diving into psychology, neuroscience, and countless interviews to uncover the hidden power of the quiet ones. Today, I'm going to share with you the most profound lessons from her journey. By the end of our time together, you will come to understand that being an introvert is not a flaw to be fixed. It is a source of immense, often untapped, strength. And for the extroverts listening, you will discover the secret to unlocking the incredible potential of the quiet people who are already in your life. This is a journey into the power of quiet, and it starts by understanding the world we live in. Book summary. So, how did our world become so loud in the first place? Why do we so often feel that to be successful, we must be the life of the party, the one who speaks up first in a meeting, the person who is always on? Susan Cain takes us back to the turn of the 20th century, to a young, skinny, and anxious high school student in Missouri named Dale. Dale was the son of a pig farmer who was perpetually broke. He was terrified of many things, but most of all, he was afraid of being tongue-tied at important moments. One day, he saw a traveling speaker who captivated the audience with his charisma. Dale was mesmerized. He realized that the ability to speak confidently was a form of power. So, he began practicing. He entered every speaking contest he could, and at first, he lost again and again. But he was persistent. Slowly, he transformed himself from a fretful farm boy into a campus speaking champion. That young man's last name was Carnegie. Dale Carnegie. He would go on to write one of the best-selling books of all time, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and build an empire teaching people the art of public speaking and self-presentation. Carnegie's story isn't just about one man's transformation. It's the story of America's transformation. The country was shifting from what the historian Warren Sussman called a culture of character to a culture of personality. In the culture of character, which dominated the 19th century, the ideal person was judged by their inner self. Words like duty, honor, integrity, and morals were the highest praise. People lived in small towns where they knew everyone, and your reputation was built on your private actions over a lifetime. But as the 20th century dawned, America changed. People flocked from farms to bustling cities. They no longer worked with lifelong neighbors, but with strangers. Suddenly, making a good first impression mattered more than ever. The key question was no longer what is a person's character, but how do they present themselves? The new ideal self was bold, entertaining, and captivating. Self-help books, which once celebrated heroes like Abraham Lincoln for his modesty, now had titles like Masterful Personality. The new buzzwords were magnetic, fascinating, stunning, and dominant. It was the birth of what Susan Cain calls the extrovert ideal, the omnipresent belief that the ideal self is gregarious, alpha, and comfortable in the spotlight. This ideal is so ingrained in us today that we barely notice it. We see it in our schools, where classroom desks are arranged in pods for group learning and teachers often believe the ideal student is an extrovert. We see it in our workplaces, which have embraced open-plan offices and endless team meetings, valuing people's skills above all else. We even see it in our ideas of leadership. Think about it. When you picture a leader, what comes to mind? Probably someone charismatic, talkative, and assertive. Someone who can command a room. Harvard Business School, which has been called the spiritual capital of extroversion, is built on this very idea. The core of its teaching method is that leaders must act confidently and make quick decisions, often with incomplete information. Class participation makes up a huge portion of a student's grade, and those who speak up often and forcefully are seen as the natural leaders. But here's a fascinating question that Cain poses. Is this assumption correct? Does the person who talks the most really have the best ideas? The research suggests otherwise. Study after study shows that there is zero correlation between the gift of gab and good ideas. In group settings, we perceive talkative people as being smarter, more attractive, and more leader-like. But this is just a perception, a bias created by the extrovert ideal. Let me tell you a story about a little exercise they do at Harvard Business School. It's called the subarctic survival situation. Students are put into small groups and told their plane has just crash-landed in the wilderness. They have to rank 15 salvaged items, a compass, an axe, a sleeping bag, in order of importance for survival. In one of these groups, there was a young man who had extensive experience in the northern backwoods. He actually knew the right answers. But he expressed his views quietly. The group barely listened to him. Instead, the action plan hinged on what the most vocal people suggested. The group ignored the very ideas that would have kept them alive, simply because they were delivered without force. When they watched a video of their discussion afterward, they were embarrassed. This isn't just a game. This happens every day, in boardrooms, in classrooms, in governments. The loudest voices often win, but they aren't always the wisest. Cain points to the work of management theorist Jim Collins, who studied the best-performing companies of the late 20th century. He found that their leaders were not flashy, charismatic figures. Instead, they were often quiet, humble, modest, and reserved. They were leaders who built up their institutions, not their own egos. So if our world is so geared toward extroversion, what happens to creativity? What happens to the deep, focused work required for true innovation? This brings us to another powerful story, that of a young man named Stephen Wozniak. On a rainy night in March 1975, a group of 30 engineers gathered in a garage in Menlo Park, California. They called themselves the Homebrew Computer Club, and their mission was to make computers accessible to regular people. Wozniak, a quiet, shy, 24-year-old calculator designer, sat in the back, listening. He was too shy to talk to anyone, but he was thrilled to be surrounded by people who shared his passion. That very night, he went home and, alone, sketched out his first design for a personal computer. A few months later, he and Steve Jobs would co-found Apple Computer. Wozniak's story perfectly illustrates a central theme in Quiet, the myth of collaborative creativity. Today, we live in an era of what Cain calls the new groupthink, an elevation of teamwork above all else. We believe innovation comes from a gregarious place, from brainstorming sessions and open-plan offices. But Wozniak's story teaches us a different lesson. He was inspired by the group, but he created alone. After that first meeting, he didn't huddle with the others to design a computer. He went back to his cubicle at Hewlett-Packard, often arriving at 6:30 in the morning and working late into the night, alone. He described this period of quiet solitude as the biggest high ever. In his memoir, he gives this advice to young people who want to be creative: work alone. You're going to be best able to design revolutionary products and features if you're working on your own. Not on a committee. Not on a team. The science backs him up. For decades, researchers have known that group brainstorming simply doesn't work. Individuals brainstorming on their own consistently produce more ideas, and better ideas, than groups do. Why? For a few reasons. In a group, some people tend to sit back and let others do the work. It's called social loafing. Another issue is production blocking. Only one person can talk at a time, so the other members of the group are forced to sit there passively, often forgetting their own ideas. But the biggest reason is the fear of looking stupid in front of one's peers, or evaluation apprehension. This fear runs deeper than you might think. Neuroscientists have found that when we stand alone against a group, our brains register it as a threat. Dissent actually triggers a fear response in a primitive part of our brain called the amygdala. Peer pressure doesn't just feel bad, it can literally change our perception of reality. Groups, Cain writes, are like mind-altering substances. So, where do these fundamental differences between introverts and extroverts come from? Is it just a matter of culture, or is there something deeper going on in our very biology? This leads us to the fascinating work of a developmental psychologist named Jerome Kagan. In 1989, Kagan brought 500 4-month-old babies into his lab at Harvard. He exposed them to a series of new experiences: popping balloons, colorful mobiles, the scent of alcohol on a cotton swab. About 20% of the babies reacted intensely. They cried, they pumped their arms and legs. Kagan called this group high reactive. About 40% stayed calm and quiet, which he called low reactive. The rest fell somewhere in between. Now, here's the counterintuitive part. Kagan predicted that the high reactive babies, the ones who made all the fuss, were the ones most likely to grow into quiet, reserved, introverted teenagers. And he was right. He followed these children for years, and that's exactly what happened. The high reactive infants developed serious, careful personalities, while the low reactive, placid babies became relaxed, confident extroverts. The key lies in their nervous systems. The high reactive babies weren't crying because they were budding drama queens. They were crying because their nervous systems were more sensitive to novelty. This sensitivity is controlled by the amygdala, the brain's emotional switchboard. Infants born with an especially excitable amygdala react strongly to anything new or stimulating. This is a profound insight. It tells us that introversion isn't about being antisocial. It's about being more sensitive to stimulation. Introverts feel just right with less stimulation: a quiet conversation with a friend, a good book, a walk in the woods. Extroverts, on the other hand, thrive on more stimulation, parties, meeting new people, high-energy activities. It's not that introverts don't like people, they just prefer to interact in less stimulating environments. This sensitivity has a beautiful upside. The psychologist Elaine Aron has done groundbreaking work on what she calls highly sensitive people. She's found that these individuals, who are often introverts, tend to be more empathic, more conscientious, and more attuned to beauty and subtlety. They process information more deeply. They feel emotions, both positive and negative, with great intensity. This brings to mind the life of Eleanor Roosevelt. She was famously shy, serious-minded, and sensitive. Her own mother nicknamed her Granny for her solemn demeanor. She married Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was her temperamental opposite, bold, buoyant, and irrepressibly social. Their differences caused friction, but they also formed the foundation of one of history's most powerful partnerships. Eleanor's sensitivity gave her a profound conscience. She couldn't look away from the suffering of others. It was Eleanor who opened Franklin's eyes to the miserable conditions of the poor in New York City. Throughout his presidency, she was his conscience, traveling the country and bringing back stories of the dispossessed, urging him to act on their behalf. As one civil rights leader said, Franklin was a politician. But Eleanor spoke out of conscience. Her sensitivity was the source of her incredible strength. This idea of sensitivity as a strength is part of what's now being called the orchid hypothesis. The theory is that many children are like dandelions. They can thrive in almost any environment. But others are like orchids. They are more delicate and can wilt easily in poor conditions. But in the right environment, with nurturing and support, they don't just thrive, they can become magnificent. These orchid children are often the high-reactive, sensitive introverts. Their sensitivity makes them more vulnerable to adversity, but it also makes them more receptive to love, encouragement, and a good environment. Now, if introverts are more sensitive to stimulation in general, what about extroverts? What drives them? The science points to something called reward sensitivity. Extroverts appear to be more responsive to the neurotransmitter dopamine, the brain's reward chemical. Their brains have a more active reward system, which gets them excited about pursuing goals, whether it's a promotion at work, a big win in the stock market, or even just a fun night out with friends. This gives extroverts that energized, enthusiastic feeling that we might call buzz. It's what drives them to take risks and put themselves out there. This reward sensitivity can be a wonderful thing. It fuels ambition and action. But it also has a downside. People who are highly reward sensitive can get so excited by the prospect of a prize that they ignore warning signs. Cain argues that this is part of what led to the 2008 financial crash. Too much power was in the hands of aggressive, risk-taking extroverts who were high on the buzz of the bull market. They ignored the cautious, introverted nerds who tried to warn them of the dangers. A perfect example of the opposite approach is Warren Buffett. Buffett is a self-described introvert who is famous for his careful, persistent, and prudent thinking. Success in investing doesn't correlate with IQ, he has said. Once you have ordinary intelligence, what you need is the temperament to control the urges that get other people into trouble in investing. He has the temperament to ignore the buzz of the crowd and listen to his own quiet, inner scorecard. So, given all these deep-seated differences, is the extrovert ideal a universal truth? Or is it just a feature of Western culture? Cain takes us to Cupertino, California, a town with a large Asian American population, where the cultural norms are very different. Here, being studious, quiet, and reserved is often admired. The library is the center of social life. This reflects a deep cultural difference. Many Asian cultures, influenced by Confucianism, value quiet contemplation and listening over bold self-expression. There's a Japanese proverb that says, "The wind howls, but the mountain remains still. And from Laoja, those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know. This reverence for quietness is linked to the concept of soft power, a term that Professor Preston Nee uses to describe leadership by water rather than by fire. Aggressive power beats you up, soft power wins you over. The ultimate wielder of soft power was Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi was, by his own account, a painfully shy man. He was afraid of speaking in public his entire life. But he came to see his shyness not as a weakness, but as his shield and buckler. It forced him to restrain his thoughts and words, to listen, to be patient. His quiet persistence and his refusal to engage in unnecessary battles allowed him to focus on his ultimate goal with unwavering resolve. In a gentle way, he said, "You can shake the world." This brings us to a crucial question. If you are an introvert, should you just accept your nature and live a life of quiet contemplation? What if your dreams require you to be bold, to speak up, to lead? This is where the work of Professor Brian Little comes in, with his brilliant free trait theory. Little, a classic introvert who is also one of the most celebrated and dynamic university lecturers in the world, argues that we are all born with certain fixed traits. But we can, and we do, act out of character for the sake of what he calls core personal projects. A core personal project is work or a cause that is deeply meaningful to you. It could be raising your children, advancing your career, or fighting for a cause you believe in. When we act out of character in service of these projects, an introvert giving a passionate speech, for example, we are not being fake. We are being true to a deeper part of ourselves. Professor Little can be a vaudevillian on stage because his core personal project is opening the minds of his students, whom he loves. The key, however, is that you cannot act out of character for too long. It's draining. It's like a rubber band. You can stretch it, but eventually, it needs to return to its natural state. This is why Little says we must create restorative niches in our lives. A restorative niche is a place you go, or a time you take, to return to your true self. It could be a quiet walk after a loud meeting, closing your office door for an hour, or even, as Professor Little has famously done, hiding in the bathroom stall between lectures to recharge. The final piece of the puzzle is communication. How can introverts and extroverts, the north and south of temperament, get along, especially in love? Cain tells the story of Greg and Emily, a classic introvert-extrovert couple. Greg is a gregarious music promoter who wants to host dinner parties every Friday night. Emily is a quiet, thoughtful lawyer who dreads these parties and just wants a peaceful evening at home with him. Greg accuses Emily of being antisocial. Emily feels misunderstood and flawed. Their conflict stems from a fundamental misunderstanding. They are differently social. Emily craves intimacy, which is about deep, one-on-one connection. Greg craves socializing, which for an extrovert can be about energy and social impact. They also have different conflict styles. Emily, like many introverts, is a conflict avoider. She lowers her voice and tries to keep things calm, which Greg perceives as withdrawal. Greg is a confrontive coper. He raises his voice to engage with the problem, which Emily perceives as aggression. The solution for them was to understand and respect each other's needs. They negotiated a free trade agreement, 2 dinner parties a month instead of 4. And they changed the format of the parties to a buffet style, which allowed Emily to have the one-on-one conversations she enjoyed, while Greg could be at the center of the action. This brings us to the final and perhaps most important question: how do we cultivate the quiet ones? How do we make sure that the next generation of introverted children grows up knowing their own strengths? Mark Twain once told a story about a man who searched the world for the greatest general who ever lived. He was told the general had passed away and gone to heaven. When he got there, St. Peter pointed to an ordinary-looking soul. "That's not the greatest general," the man protested. He was only a cobbler on earth. St. Peter replied, I know. But if he had been a general, he would have been the greatest of them all. How many quiet children, Cain asks, are like that cobbler? Their potential is overlooked because they don't fit the mold. The key for parents and teachers is to stop trying to turn introverted kids into extroverts. Instead, we must help them thrive on their own terms. This means respecting their need for downtime after school. It means not calling them shy, a label they will internalize as a negative trait. It means gently encouraging them to step outside their comfort zones, but at their own pace. If a child is afraid of the ocean, you don't throw them into the waves. You play in the sand near the water's edge, then you dip a toe, then a foot, until they learn to swim on their own. Most importantly, it means helping them find their passions. For an introverted child, a deep interest in something, whether it's music, or science, or art, can be a profound source of confidence and a pathway to finding like-minded friends. True self-esteem comes from competence. When a child finds something they love and they're good at, they build a resilient sense of self that can withstand the pressures of the outside world. Ultimately, the message of quiet is a message of balance. The world needs both introverts and extroverts. It needs the man of action and the man of contemplation. It needs the bold Franklin Roosevelts and the conscientious Eleanor Roosevelts. It needs those who charge ahead, and those who pause to look before they leap. Commentary. Reading Susan Cain's Quiet feels like a homecoming for so many people. It's a powerful, reassuring, and deeply validating book that gives you permission to be who you are. The most profound lesson, for me, is the simple yet revolutionary idea that our culture has it backward. We've made a virtue of living only as extroverts, and in doing so, we've discouraged the inner journey. We've lost our center. The book is a call to find that center again. It challenges the very foundations of our modern world, from the way we educate our children to the way we run our businesses. It asks us to question why we mistake assertiveness for competence, and eloquence for good ideas. It reminds us that some of our greatest ideas, art, and inventions came from quiet and cerebral people who knew how to tune into their inner worlds. In a world that can't stop talking, the act of listening has become a quiet rebellion. The act of deep thought, a form of quiet revolution. The book isn't an attack on extroverts, it's a plea for balance. It's a reminder that we need both the people who thrive in the spotlight and the people who are more comfortable with a lamplit desk. So, what can you do with this knowledge, starting today? Here are a few simple ideas. First, identify your own restorative niche. Where is the place, or what is the activity, that allows you to return to your true self? It could be a walk in the park, listening to music, or just 10 minutes of quiet in your room. Whatever it is, schedule it into your life, just as you would any other important appointment. Second, the next time you're in a group setting, whether it's a class discussion or a family dinner, try a small experiment. If you're an introvert who normally stays quiet, challenge yourself to share one thoughtful idea. If you're an extrovert who normally does a lot of the talking, challenge yourself to listen more and actively draw out the quietest person in the room. You might be surprised by what you learn. And finally, think of a quiet person in your life who you admire. It could be a friend, a family member, or a colleague. Take a moment today to appreciate them for their unique strengths, their thoughtfulness, their loyalty, their quiet conviction. Let them know you see them. That was a summary of Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking, by Susan Cain. We've touched on the major themes and stories today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary is just a map. The real journey happens when you walk the path yourself. There is a certain magic in letting a book like this unfold at your own pace, when a story or a single sentence connects with you in a way you never expected. This summary is meant to be a signpost, to help you decide if this is a journey you want to take. If anything we've discussed today has sparked a feeling of recognition or curiosity in you, then I truly hope you'll pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning facts, it's an experience that can genuinely change how you see yourself and your place in this loud, beautiful world. Also, if you found this summary valuable, and you're hungry for more wisdom from the world's most impactful books, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It lets me know that we're on the right track, and ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.